I'm Tanya, and I work on partnerships and community events, and that's how we got in touch with Angie to organize this workshop.
And I'm Mirko, I'm a mathematician, and I work with the Society doing security audits mostly.
Yeah, so I'm Liz. I guess I could give you I'll just quickly say that, yeah, so I took over lease authority like in 2016. It was an already existing company, so there was history. It was originally founded in 2011 in the US by somebody named Zuko, who went on to found Zcash, if you might have heard of Zcash. So they're a sibling company. We have a relationship there. But yeah, so before lease authority, I've done like a lot of project management with software development. So I have a lot of understanding more of the software development lifecycle in general, within particular areas too. And then I went on to work for something called the Open Technology Fund, which is an independent nonprofit that funds open source projects that are geared towards internet freedom and digital rights and human rights and things like that. So enabling secure communications and privacy enhancing technologies and stuff, which is actually how I ended up meeting the team from Lease Authority. But so, Lease Authority, we have a mission. I'll just quickly go through this. Lease Authority's mission is to build and support ethical and usable technology solutions that advance digital security and privacy as fundamental human rights. So we really care about privacy and security. That's what that says. And the build and the support means that we do software development ourselves, and we also do security audits and security consulting for other software projects to help them also reach these goals. So yes, security consulting, software development, community involvement. That's why we're talking to you all here right now, because we actually care about this stuff. And then product development, also looking at how things like sustainable products within the open source ecosystem can work together without totally corrupting things either. So that it doesn't have to be this thing of for-profit is proprietary and everything, open source is voluntary. So yeah, trying to bridge that gap there too. So yeah, you all have, I looked over some of the slides from your previous sessions and tried to kind of figure out where you're coming from, and the little introductions give me a little bit of information. But that said, I would love to be interrupted, and I'd love for this to be a conversation and stuff, because I could talk endlessly, but I don't want to waste your time or my time. So yeah, if you want to direct me towards particular directions, or you want to make this a conversation or ask questions or anything like that, it's fine. No offense taken at all. So I'll start with why does security matter in general? I'm not sure how much of you are security fans already and are convinced of this, but oftentimes in the software development worlds that there are, security is more of an afterthought, and it's not really something that's set up from the beginning. So it's always helpful to just go back to kind of the roots of why security matters. We rely on data to make our decisions, and I feel like that's kind of one of the simplest things to say about how the world functions, that information is power, and that, I don't know about this new tagline, but the new tagline is data is the new oil. That it's so valuable, and you hear about GDPR and stuff like that, then that's referring to personal data, but in general, data, whether you're trying to protect trade secrets at the corporate level or your personal information, data is power. If you know the facts, you can make different decisions and stuff like that. So security is related to that. And how is it related to that? So coming back to, then that means that security is about power too. That there's 3 different ways that help to think about security: integrity, confidentiality, and availability. So the integrity is this idea that your data is unchanged, or is only changed as authorized. So if you say that you have 10,000 euros in your bank account, and your bank says that you've got 10,000 euros in your bank account, everything's good. But if somebody hacks in and changes it to say that you've got 20,000 in your bank account, then it's different. So the data being what we expect it to be, authorized changes, things like that, that's the idea of integrity. And confidentiality is whether or not unauthorized parties can actually see it. So this is a big deal with hacks and stuff like that, because people get your personal data, in particular hacks. And then availability is like the kind of reliability. Can you count on your data being there when you want it to be there? So you go to your bank, you need to be able to, they need to know that you have 10,000 euros in your bank account available. I mean, that data needs to be available to them, otherwise they can't give you, you can't withdraw your money and stuff like that. So these are different ways that we need to think about how we're securing this data. So, yeah, 2.0, it's awful. Web 3.0 is the future. But this is just examples of like hacks that have happened in the news. And I'm sure you all have read the news in the last, I don't know, decade to see some of these stories come about that, yeah, security can have huge consequences. I mean, if security is not maintained with data, that you can have huge consequences. It can be very expensive for companies. It can be very hurtful to individuals. So there's a big movement to decentralize all the things. This is related to why P2P networks are also important. So we think about peer-to-peer is this idea of not having centralized authority. You know, there's an element of decentralization to all peer-to-peer networks, and this idea of redistributing the power to the edges. And of course, this comes like you'll hear discussions about decentralizing things in various manners at the ledger, like blockchain, or permissionless blockchains, or public blockchains, protocol levels like peer-to-peer protocols, peer-to-peer communication protocols, consensus mechanisms. How are people agreeing? You don't have a trusted central authority making the decision of what the truth is. That truth is through, you know, this kind of agreement of the different parties. I think you had a talk on consensus already, so yeah, cool. Yeah, and then data storage. Even the idea of where the data is kept. You know, you can distribute this across multiple nodes in a peer-to-peer network versus keeping it in one centralized place. Computation, also you can decentralize the computation for faster computation, and governance too, which I believe there's another talk on later about that. So I won't say too much. But this is why peer-to-peer stuff is cool. And one other thing that we work a lot with is the transparency and that aspect of security too. So by having, I mean, and this is something that sometimes people struggle with, is this idea of privacy or security versus transparency, and how does being public and transparent actually make things more secure. And the best way that I found to think about this or to explain this to people is, again, that idea of power and authority over things. And so if it is not public, if the code is not public, then you have to trust an authority that the code is doing something that they say it's doing. Whereas if the code is open source, then perhaps you can have this independent verification, and that trust can be distributed across different parties. And so there's this kind of power balance that can occur between transparency and privacy. And so you can actually get more security by things being transparent in some cases. So the idea of the code is public, maybe the data is not. So you can see what the code is doing, what the algorithm is doing. Do you know how the algorithm is making its decisions? If you're transparent about that, then you can trust in the outcome of the algorithm differently. Yeah, and I think that this goes to all kinds of different levels when it comes to software and our systems. Everything to just, you know, even the risk management, like how are decisions about things being made, and governance and everything. And yeah.
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah, it's a nice breaking point.
I was just wondering whether you were using a security and privacy kind of like.
I used it interchangeably right there. Yeah.
Yeah, you used it interchangeably. Okay, cool.
And then, well, I mean, they're not interchangeable, right? I mean, we can to talk quickly about the semantics. The privacy often is in that confidentiality one. So if you think about like security enables privacy, but that's sometimes a good way to think about it. The privacy is like that confidential side of that stuff. But privacy doesn't usually, I'll say usually, because I'm sure somebody can find an exception, but doesn't usually mean anything when it comes to like availability and integrity.
Right, okay. Yeah, thank you. I've always wondered whether there was a particular difference.
Yeah. Like, you know, again, like a simple way that I like to think about it is that security enables privacy. That if you don't have security, if you don't have that confidentiality, then you don't have privacy. So it's a little bit more fundamental, if that makes sense.
Right, thanks.
So, yeah, blockchain gets hacked too. So, yeah, I had that Web 2.0 stuff about how our current centralized systems, but blockchain tech has its weaknesses too. Yeah. Although, some of these are due to other reasons too. Some of these are like centralization was played a part. But yeah, anyway, so security, the other aspect to really think about often is that security is, nothing is 100% safe, nothing is 100% guaranteed. If anyone tells you that they can say 100% his system is secure, then yeah, they're lying, sorry. So security isn't about being 100% secure or safe, it's about thinking about the risk management. And this is where, you know, we can get into this a little bit more later, but this idea that how do I make it hard enough for somebody to get something that it's not, they're no longer incentivized to do it. So thinking about that kind of availability, integrity, confidentiality angle of stuff that you make those things strong enough. Yeah, so risk management, basic concepts of that are you have to identify what your risks are. And we can go into more details of how you might do this with a system, but yeah, the important things to consider are the probability, like the likeliness of that kind of thing to a risk to occur, the impact that it will have, like maybe it's kind of harmless. So if they find out one particular piece of data, how much can they tell versus if they get all of it? And the responsibility, where the responsibility lies with things too. So can you even control aspects of that risk? Some of them are going to be outside of your control. Yeah, and then you have to make a decision as how you can manage that risk. So you accept it, you transfer it, you avoid it, and you reduce it. So sometimes you just say, yep, we got a risk. There's nothing, you know, we don't want to do anything about it. We're just going to accept it as is. You can transfer that risk to somebody else. That's like related to that kind of responsibility thing. So can you push that to another party so it's not your concern? Can you avoid it? Can you change your system in a way, reroute things, avoid that particular risk some way? And can you reduce it, again, mitigate it? So yeah, it's not quite accepting it as is, but it's realizing that, you know, it's an important risk. I'm going to do something, I'm going to reduce that risk, but I'm not going to make it go away completely. So these are, it's this mindset with security that's helpful to think about. And yeah, so coming back to how hard to make it, this is a great quote that security in it is like locking your house or car. It doesn't stop the bad guys, but if it's good enough, they may move on to an easier target. So, I mean, this is again, digital world is very similar to the analog world in the sense that we all know that people can break into our apartments. We all know that people can break into our cars if they are so inclined to do so. And that we try to reduce the easiness of it, so we lock things, you know, that makes it a little bit harder for them to just walk in. And, you know, maybe we use a stronger lock and stuff like that. We put bars in our windows and stuff, but we still know that if somebody really wanted to get in, they could. And that's also an important thing to think about outside of our systems, which is that there are other social things in place to deal with the consequences of those actions. So if somebody does still choose to break into your apartment, then you can call the police. So there's other ways to handle it. So threat modeling is something about like assessing those risks. This is what we do with security. So these are some examples of questions, but there's all kinds of questions that you can ask yourself. You need to figure out what are your threats in your system. And this happens in peer-to-peer systems just like it happens in all systems. So yeah, thinking about like what do you have that is of value that people might want? How might they go about getting it? When could they get it? Are there particular opportunities that make it easier to get than other times? And yeah, what are you willing to do to prevent it? And so this is something like an activity that's important to go through. Just yeah, figure out what kind of threats that you have. And then good security practices. Security by design, which is thinking about security in the design phase of things. Yeah, actually this is fun. Our name, least authority, we're named after the principle of least authority. It's this general idea that you give each component of a system only the authority or privilege or power necessary to complete the function that they're supposed to be doing, and no more. You don't give them excess authority, so you give them the least amount. You don't have a single point of failure. This is why also a lot of times people talk about P2P systems, because of that decentralization concept, that if everything's in one particular spot, if it fails, then you have nothing. And so by distributing things, it also can be a good security practice in some cases to not have the single point of failure, or SPOF, as people say. And yeah, just doing things like building quality software, you don't have bugs. You research and stay aware of the new threats, like so does the landscape changes over time. And do internal reviews, of course, external independent reviews. This is what Least Authority does for other software projects. So they'll have us come in and do these independent audits of their code and their handling of things. And then also incentivize your community to participate in the security too. So this is where things like bug bounties come in. You guys have all heard of bug bounties, right? Okay. So far, everybody, like, is this too high level?
It's pretty high level.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's too high level. I'm curious. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get into some more P2P stuff soon. So yeah, make it a priority. Incorporate security into your practices. Share in the industry. These are just best practices for security by design. Especially the share experiences and failures. This one, oftentimes, especially with commercial companies, can get lost because they don't want to be embarrassed about silly mistakes. But it's really important for everybody to talk openly about experiences of hacks and stuff like that, so that there's awareness within the industry. Yeah, security audits. The goal of this is to discover the vulnerabilities before the attackers do. You improve your system to work better through doing this. Sometimes people do security audits to just, assure their stakeholders that they did due diligence. Because again, you can't guarantee that you're not ever going to have any security problems, but you can reduce that risk. And so sometimes people, there's good intentions to do it all the time, but also you can build some community support too. And these usually follow a simple process of discovery and planning, where the independent or your internal team can come in and discuss about what it is that you're doing, what are the goals, let's plan the audit, and then you actually do the investigation. You produce the initial audit report. This is a very common practice of a common process that people follow. And then the team that had their stuff audited will mitigate and remediate the issues that were found in the initial audit report. And then usually the auditing team comes back and verifies that the changes were sufficient. And then a final audit security report is produced. So yeah, okay, now we get to the more interesting stuff for P2P. So these are some attack vectors for P2P systems, but this is not a complete list by any means. And these are not necessarily all equal, they're kind of different. So one is central authority certification and admission control. Denial of service attacks can happen here. So this is the idea that in peer-to-peer systems, you have sometimes the kind of like control to figure out who can actually participate in the peer-to-peer network. So you might have some sort of centralized authority that gives certifications that you can participate in the P2P network. You might, if it's like a permissioned blockchain, then there's somebody that's like a gatekeeper, and there can be attacks to this kind of party that's managing the nodes coming into the peer-to-peer network. And of course, it really depends on the P2P network as to like what it is doing, as to whether or not these attacks are interesting to attackers. Because there's certain things like certificate authorities, like for IP, like for web addresses. I believe that like that kind of thing, they get attacked because of there's incentive there. Whereas other systems, might not be a true incentive for them to be attacked. Voting and incentives within the system itself. So these are like the kind of gaming attacks. So if you're talking about like mechanism design within like or economic incentives within cryptocurrency and blockchain projects, this is much more the case. Or systems where you have voting that just occurs in general, even if there's not money. And then with permissionless admission and proof of permissionless admission systems, so if you don't have somebody kind of gatekeeping who's coming into the network and the network is just open to anyone, then you can get bots and botnets kind of doing things to the system. I think like an example of this is probably like Tor, like the Tor network, having people come in and be nodes in the Tor network, and just like the kind of results of P2P. And it also works on the side of like, also systems that are receiving like Tor traffic might also have issues as to whether or not it's a bot coming from the Tor network versus a human coming through the Tor network out. So it's, yeah, there can be issues in those.
What is that an actual problem?
What is the what?
Sorry. Why it's a problem between a bot and a human in this case? Because the bot makes more requests or what?
I guess it depends on you. So this is where it really depends on what your P2P network is doing. Yeah. So if P2P network, the whole term P2P is just a design, right? It's just designed that like the system, each peers are talking to each other versus going through a centralized like client server model or whatever. So like that's like it's a form of design that you can apply to all kinds of different use cases. So it depends on what your network is doing as to whether or not the humanness matters. So like I said, these attacks aren't going to be true. These kinds of considerations and attacks aren't going to be true for every single P2P network because there might not be any use of that attack. So I guess maybe in some blockchain networks you might not care if bots are participating. Like maybe you want bots to participate. Maybe the idea of human versus bot doesn't matter. But whereas like if you are like I'm thinking like examples. Like Cloudflare and Tor, like there are issues that they had that so Cloudflare helps with DDoS attacks on websites, and they're a content delivery network, and Tor, people were using Tor to do bot attacks, and so then any Cloudflare website started caring about whether or not you were human or bot, so that they could either protect against you if you're a bot or serve you the page if you're a human. And so then all of a sudden humanness matters. So it really depends on the kind of use case as to whether or not bot or human matters. Yeah.
What are there a couple of examples of voting incentives or gaming attacks, I guess, that you have?
And that one is really specific to like what the use case is, but like if you have Mirko, feel free to jump in on this one too.
Yeah, from the tip of my head, and maybe you have heard of the Hedera network, which uses the hashgraph consensus algorithm to speed up blockchain, and it's a proof of stake mechanism, and proof of stake mechanisms are prone to being gamed all the time. People can collude and say, okay, we don't want to vote for this kind of transaction and we vote against this, and so politics come into play. So in general, I would say gaming attacks ever happen in the blockchain-ish space when proof of stake is involved. You can also see it on Ethereum coming up nowadays.
I think that also smart contracts, like a lot of smart contracts within the Ethereum space, I think you can see some gaming depending on what the smart contract is doing. So people might try to kind of figure out how the system works and use it to their advantage. And again, it just depends on the implementation as to like where the incentives are.
Right. So like
so what attack makes sense.
So like the DAO hack would be a gaming attack, hypothetically.
No.
Yeah. No, I don't.
No. I mean the DAO.
The DAO hack was a bug in the program.
Yeah, that one's interesting in that like somebody figured out how to manipulate like not the best code.
On Ethereum, it would be if proof of stake in Ethereum 2.0 is implemented, and then you are someone who wants to do a transaction with $1 million, and everyone knows this transaction is from you, and then the people decide, no, we don't approve this transaction. We all collude, and you cannot make any payments anymore because we hate you or whatever, and so you are out of the game, and that would be a gaming attack. And because people collude.
I mean, that one's like huge in the sense that it really depends on like what are the incentives and what are the rules. Like, is it somebody kind of the rule? They don't like the rules aren't wrong, but they figure out how to like play within the rules. And I mean, you could argue that like the DAO hack is kind of that because but then also you could argue that it was a mistake in how they coded it.
It was gamed, but it wasn't necessarily an attack or a hack because
they did. Yeah, is everyone familiar with the DAO hack?
But maybe is this gaming attacks more? Could be related to maybe also like governance kind of things. Like when someone, if you vote with your money, even though there is a majority of people that are voting for something, like someone just threw a lot out. taken to one end.
Definitely.
Yeah, the thing that gets interesting about some of these too, especially that one, is that this, like, everything could be right, and yeah, like, you don't, like, is it an attack? Is it a hack? Is it really? If people didn't break the rules, they followed the rules. They just they followed them in a way that you didn't expect them to.
They gamed it.
Yeah, they gamed it on you. And so that one is like really interesting, and I think that one becomes like that's where we've seen things like really blow up as people try to design these systems with incentives, and that's where like mechanism design and incentive design and systems where, you know, like from the outside when you're making the system, you're using your own logic and you're like, this makes sense to me, these rules make sense, but that like humans think differently about things, and it's not necessarily a hack if you still play by the rules, I guess.
Also in classic Bitcoin there is the selfish mining attack, which gives you basically play by the rules, you just don't show your blocks in a special way. You do some strategies there, and then you have a slight advantage, so you broke the equilibrium at that point.
Yeah, like this area is, I don't know, I feel like it's going to be huge to watch in the next few years.
It sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, and it's also going to lead to like lots of really big embarrassments. But we all can learn from that too. Again, coming back to the idea that part of security is sharing experiences and failures, is that as long as we all go into the space knowing that some of this kind of setting up the rules of the game is experimental, and that there will be failures, and that we have to iterate and learn, I think it's a good thing. Yeah, some other ones here. Yeah, so reputation management and multiple identities is another one, and that's like Sybil attacks is one attack that happens in that space. But there's all kinds of other attacks, again, depending on the implementation of the P2P system, as to like how much does reputation matter and how much does identity matter, as to like there can be all kinds of different things that can be attacked there. Consensus methods, you guys probably talked about this a little bit at the other one about consensus, and basically how you can gain the truth, or I can change the truth. But yeah, Byzantine faults is something that is, here it's just like basically, did you guys go over Byzantine stuff already?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, because that was the consensus. Okay. That's a big one too. And then peer communications and data integrity. So this is like man in the middle and poisoning attacks. So corrupting the data as it goes around the system too, or man in the middle to get the data. Yeah. So lots of attack vectors and attacks. And this, like I said, this isn't a complete list. This is just some like high level stuff. Is there anything that you see missing?
Not right now.
Yeah. I mean, people write papers and papers on this kind of stuff, on each of these individually, on the whole of it, and yeah, I've been debating these things for decades. So, yeah, it's fun stuff. I'll talk a little bit about privacy some more now. So, yeah, if we must depend on privacy if we expect to have any. I don't know, again, another quote that's fun. So privacy by design. So again, I think earlier we talked quickly about how privacy is enabled by security, and that this is dealing a little bit more in depth with the confidentiality of stuff. So privacy by design is this idea of building privacy into the system from the very start, thinking about it just like you think about security from the start. And right now, yeah, a lot of our systems, privacy is an issue. This is why GDPR came into effect in Europe. You guys are familiar with GDPR?
Too little.
Yes. Yeah? What?
Very little. Very little.
Yeah?
But,
very little.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How to say this quickly? Yeah, General Data Protection Regulation. Basically, it's written with, in its heart, privacy by design is kind of the heart of it. That's the important thing, I think, to know.
okay.
Go ahead.
No, just that I didn't read enough, but I still have this question, maybe because I didn't read enough, but do they treat data, like, user data as something that you can block within the network somehow? I don't know if I'm, like, if it, but that's like that's like impossible.
Yeah.
By definition. And so, like it sounds like that they try to think or to frame it in a way that it's like as if, you know, like if it's like something physical as that you trade, but it's not really like that how it's working.
Yeah,
so it's that's what I find it very confusing, and what they're trying to like do about it.
Yeah. I mean, there can be a lot of. We could have a whole session on that too. I mean, basically, the idea is that I mean, if you think of it in the larger concept of the space, that there with the advent of the web, there was a big movement to centralizing personal data into warehouses and just collecting all kinds of data about people. So you know, you log on to something and they do all this like you log on to your web, like Facebook. They track you. They're collecting all kinds of personal data about you. They're not necessarily disclosing what they store about you. They're making conclusions about you based on the personal data that they already have about you. They're making like, you know, they're gathering extra information that you don't even know about yourself. And then they maybe track you as you go to other websites on the internet. And so they're gathering all this personal data. And that's just their model, is to gather. And so things, and they're not the only website that works like that, like personalized ads, all of it. Like a lot of Web 2.0 SaaS and like these like software products, like the business models are built on this idea of gathering lots of personal data. And so I think things went too far. Regulators like usually step in whenever things go too far, and try to like bring things back. And so yeah, I mean, it's written with that kind of world in mind. It wasn't written with like blockchain in mind. That said, they did try to write it to be like technologically agnostic, and so there's like these principles to follow. So yeah, there is a lot of interesting discussion these days as to how does it apply to more newer technologies like that. But it can work. I mean, it can work. It just requires like kind of a bit of like compromising and discussion on both sides, and people are talking and trying to figure out like, okay, yeah, so the right to be forgotten is one of the things, like data minimization is another thing, but right to be forgotten is one that gets discussed all the time with blockchain.
Is that even possible, like on
blockchain?
No, like on the internet anyway.
To be well, it's not the right to be like completely forgotten.
What does it mean exactly?
It's the right for for you to be able to like
your data from the server, or what does that mean?
Yeah, so a good example is I mean, this isn't the best, but like if you committed a crime and there was a news story, you should have the right to be able to say to Google, remove it from your search because this is about me. The same way that you could have maybe told a newspaper to not print that article again about you. It doesn't that doesn't translate perfectly into the digital world in that sense. Like our analog rights, you know, things change, things are different. But yeah, this idea that like pieces of data, or that you can ask, you can say to Google, delete all my history. If you don't have a legitimate reason to be keeping this history about me, then it's my data. I ask for you to delete it, and that is that kind of like right. And yeah, I mean, but if you work in systems, you know that like deletion is relative to the system. What does that mean? And it can mean different things. And so there's like an amount of figuring out what's reasonable within different technologies to achieve that goal. Like, so for example, if you ask somebody, like if you have the right to say to a company, delete me from your databases, and they don't have a legitimate reason to keep that data anymore, like, so they delete it from their main servers, but do you also need to know that they deleted it from the backups? You know, like, is it reasonable request for every person that requires that piece of data that they have to go back into their backups and also delete it from just their backups? So, you know, there's like a reasonable amount that has to be there too. So, but it's, I mean, if you think more about it as like a negotiation for us to still have some rights about personal data, that's kind of the aim here, and to not just be beholden to tech companies, or all companies actually. That was a long. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything about GDPR because it's a big topic, but.
No, the thing is just, your point was right that in principle it's impossible, but the point with GDPR is that we force the companies to imply that possibility no matter what. So, of course this is artificial, but they have to do it anyway, or they have to try it.
Yeah, and it's better than just the alternative, which is they just can collect all the personal data and do whatever they want with it, leave no say. So yeah, okay. And one thing that I think is cool to talk about in these systems is also all kinds of new technology that's coming out that can change the paradigm around privacy for us too. How many of you have heard of things like zero-knowledge proofs? These are so much fun. Okay. This is my favorite slide. All right. But there's some stuff that you've heard about, like probably public key infrastructure and digital signatures. This exists on the web right now. We use it. Okay, cool. There's things like hashes, salting, and encryption in general. Cool. We use it right now.
What's salting?
Yeah. And what's salting?
Yeah. So adding a little bit of extra data in there. You like salt some data in. Sorry.
Yeah, it is a bit like this. So you put some randomness or you put entropy basically into the system to make
That's
it
a
work.
formal term.
Is that like a reference to like snails, or what? Why is it called salting?
I don't know, but you just spice it up. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I think. You just you like add a little like spice on
Like
it.
salt guy.
Give it a little like flavor twist, right?
Sprinkle a little bit.
So this stuff, I mean, and this kind of stuff, this is like the technology that makes security change, and that's why this is in here too. So it's beyond actually privacy. Some of this is about like securing things better too. Yeah, so encryption, you guys know encryption. Okay. So that encryption, basic encryption is used now. Off-chain, out-of-network data storage, that's kind of a simple concept. I feel like that name kind of explains it, but the idea that keeping data cordoned off or something is another way to help secure it or keep it more private. But homomorphic encryption?
I actually listened to a podcast by accident about it.
What?
I listened to a podcast by accident about it.
You listened to a podcast about homomorphic encryption by accident? Love to hear how you stumbled on that. That's cool though. You don't have to if you don't.
Yeah.
Talking to Dad.
What'd you say?
No,
Talking to Dad, probably.
So, yeah, these last three are kind of like the new, I don't want to say newer, because this, academically speaking, some of these have been around for a really long time. But in terms of them being able to be implemented into systems, it's actually more possible now than it was before. So they're new in the implementing world, maybe not so new in the academic mathematic world, of which Mirko comes from. So homomorphic encryption. Okay, modifying encrypted data without decrypting it. Oh, is that a good layman's
you can do
explanation?
computation on the
Yeah, you can do stuff to the data without decrypting it. So that's good for security, right? Yeah. Zero knowledge proofs that you can, this covers a wide range of stuff, but it's this idea that I can prove to you something about the data, that I have the data, that some element attribute of the data, without actually exposing the data to you. Thus the name zero knowledge, that I don't actually expose the data to you, but I can prove mathematically that I know things. That's cool. This is when all of a sudden math becomes cool again. Do you have anything to add to that layman's explanation?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. An example of zero knowledge proof?
Yeah, a simple example. Yeah. How would you use it, or
For example, for if you use not a classic hash function like SHA or something, but you use a zero knowledge version of this hash function, then you can prove to me that you have a data set which hashes to a particular hash without revealing the actual data set. Because normally you give me the hash and I say, do you have the data? Prove it to me, then you have to give me the data set and I will hash it myself.
Right.
And then if both hashes are the same, then this is the proof. But with a zero knowledge hash function, you can prove it without revealing the actual data.
And what's important for P2P in this case, that example is good because if I have a data set and I want to prove to you, the hashing example, that I give you a hash of it, but maybe because I don't want to give you the data set yet, I might give it to a trusted third party, and that third party does the hash, and you have to trust them. And so there's the trust dynamic is different because basically somebody else has to see the data to attest to you not lying about that. Whereas zero knowledge proofs is that you never have to expose the data. but you can still prove that you have it.
But you reveal the structure of the data, like the keys? Like, do you reveal
No,
the keys?
it's zero knowledge, you reveal nothing.
Not even the keys?
No, you prove that you have done the computation to derive the SHA value, and the proof, it cannot be faked. Okay. And this is really important because for cryptocurrencies like Monero and Zcash and so on, you probably don't want to reveal how much coins you have, right? This should just be an encrypted blah blah.
Yeah.
But still you want to pay something, and so people have to know that you have at least 4 coins or something without revealing your actual amount of coins that you have.
Yeah. So there are tons of applications for that, and I think that like that's one of those things that can fundamentally change, especially the security landscape of P2P networks. Because if you can start doing these things, then you can do a lot more with. If you can start like attesting, proving certain data and things within a network without ever having to reveal it, then yeah, you can do a lot more things with P2P. So that's pretty cool. And secure multi-party computation. This is also nice. So being, oh gosh, this one is a little harder for me. But if you have data and I have data and someone else has data and we want to do something with that data to come up with a result and not share the data with each other. That's also kind of it. I think maybe I'm bad at explaining that one, but I think a good example is probably like bidding on something and figuring out who wins the bid without having to trust somebody. Like, so normally if you go bid on something like eBay, okay, you're gonna go bid on eBay. eBay doesn't show your bid to everybody else that is bidding on it, but you know other people are bidding, but you have to trust eBay figures out what those bids are, and you trust eBay is choosing the right top bid. So you have a centralized third party that you're trusting to like take care of that bidding, whereas with secure multi-party computation, you could do that bidding and you guys don't have to trust anyone. The computation is happening about who wins the bid without anyone revealing the bids to each other, and you trust the math. You don't have to trust the third party. Do you have a better explanation?
No, that works.
Okay. I feel like giving an example is the best way to do it. To really, especially to differentiate it from zero knowledge proofs too, because they're similar. Yeah.
What would be the difference? Because I was going to say, is it being done by using zero knowledge proofs?
It can.
It can, but it's
it must not.
All right.
Yeah, so they're a little different. These are cool things. Again, I think that also could be cool for the future P2P networks, being more secure and stuff, because yeah, you can do more cool things in your network without having to worry about other attacks and stuff, because if you don't have a third party that can be gamed, then if you don't have a third party that's centralizing data that could be gamed, then the attack vector is removed. Things like that. Cool, yeah.
Can I just say that if you are interested in zero knowledge proofs, learning some more, there's a great organization in Berlin, Zero Knowledge Podcast, and then they have an event too that we work with them on, but it's a great source of information.
It's zeroknowledge.fm.
Yeah, Zero Knowledge.
And she does a good podcast. She talk about a ton of zero knowledge zero knowledge proof type projects and other related stuff. I think she has an episode or two on multi-party computation too. But that one is a podcast and it's good. And there's other stuff out there too. But that's how she'll do interviews with people that are actually doing implementations of this stuff too. So it's really cool to hear the different use cases and stuff for these. Yeah.
And if you want to dig into the mathematics on a really easy level, we also have our first...
You did a workshop, explaining the math behind...
but on a really simple level. So if you can do basic integer addition and multiplication, you can follow.
Math becomes cool again, right?
But where is this workshop? Is it?
It happened already, so it's on.
We recorded it, but you can watch it.
It's on our
YouTube
channel. Yeah, Lisa Authority. Yeah.
Cool.
We'll post it in the Keybase.
Yeah, I'll post in Keybase.
Oh, good idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you already answer, and don't answer it again if you did, how you would access data without revealing the data?
How you would access it?
I mean, because you're basically proving that there's something happening in an encrypted, like there's some data that exists, right? But you're proving it without revealing that data exists. Is that?
Oh, could you prove something without the data, like revealing that the data exists at all?
Well, because isn't it zero knowledge? You were saying that zero knowledge proof is a way to essentially run a function to determine that something exists without unencrypting it, right? So you're basically, is that correct?
Yeah, not even just unencrypting. You don't have to show anything, just to prove that you have it.
So you're proving something without actually running numbers from within that data set.
Yeah, like you can really if you know a hash function, right? You have a big whatever blob of data and you throw it into the hash function, in the end you get the hash. So that's what the hash function is doing. And so you do the same thing with the zero knowledge proof, but in the end you get the hash and also a proof that you have run the hash function. And you can only have done this if you have the actual data set. And that's how it's done basically. So.
Yeah. There's some other good examples like the red ball and green ball. I'm not very practiced at explaining this one, so again you can jump in. But if I have a red ball and a green ball in each of my hands and I put them behind my back, and you want to try to figure out, they're trying to figure out.
Yeah, but they are colorblind.
They're colorblind. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so I have a red ball and a green ball, and I put them behind my back, and you're colorblind, and I tell you that they're two different colors, but you're colorblind, so you can't tell that they're two different colors. So so what we can do is we can do this thing where I switch them, and you guess which hand has the red ball, and I tell you an answer. And then if you do that enough numbers of times, the probability that I could be lying decreases so much that it becomes provable that they're different colors.
Does it stay in your same hand every time?
No, I can switch them.
Oh, you can switch them.
Yeah.
Actually, the colorblind person have the balls.
Oh, do they? Thank you. Yeah, I said I'm not very practiced at explaining that one. Some people have explained that one lots of times, but that's another thing that, like, yeah, if you start to think about that way, it starts to make more sense. Otherwise, it's math magic. What were you, Abigail? You were going to say something?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. So these are fun things, and yeah, I don't know. We could talk about them for a while.
And they are great for P2P, right? All of this reduces the trust in the third party.
Yes, yeah, because it has to do with, because I mean, if you look at non-P2P systems, you usually have centralized authority of some sort that you're trusting for something. And yeah, I mean, with these things, you can remove that centralized need, that centralized need for trust. You can remove certain areas of not even just centralized authorities, but also like, yeah, like the bidding on eBay example with secure multi-party computation. You need to have a trusted party to figure out who the winner of that bidding war is, but in a P2P system, but now you can do bidding in a P2P system and not have a trusted party because you can be doing the computation and figuring out who wins in a way that doesn't have that trust there. And so I think it does lend to not only making P2P systems work better in the sense of like trust and privacy and all that stuff, but just from the mere idea of security, because by having something a trusted party, essentially, you have a point of attack, and so you're removing that point of attack too.
How do they achieve this secure multi-party? You use like smart contracts. Can you achieve that with a smart contract maybe? Because we had a smart contracts.
I don't know if any smart contracts do
Probably, I don't think there's one special way how to do it. I think it's just a model.
I don't know of any smart contracts doing that, but they could.
Because you can just send the values and have a program running this there, and then just choose at the end of a.
But it's in the open.
I think, yeah, it's in the open.
So everybody sees the data going in and out and stuff.
Isn't Ocean Protocol doing something like this?
Doing secure multi-party computation?
I mean, they are a marketplace, right? Somewhat. So.
Yeah, I mean, these are things that I'm sure there's projects doing it, but at least they're like, oh no, decentralized exchanges. I think some people with decentralized that are working on decentralized exchanges are doing the secure multi-party computation already.
ZK-DeFi stuff, where you have decentralized financial systems, maybe. Yeah.
Well, I think that this works for that works really well for the decentralized exchanges, figuring out who's gonna do the exchange, the crypto. Yeah, zero knowledge proofs are definitely, there's systems out there using them. Zcash. And homomorphic crypto, encryption. NewCipher is doing that, right?
Yeah, but for every bit to encrypt homomorphically, you need 16 megabits.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how large. So it's
still
somewhat on the border between practicability.
But it's on the border. I don't know. That's the thing, is that like that's what we were saying about these things, is that like they academically have existed for a while, but they're now on the border or across the line into actually being usable in systems. So like zero knowledge proofs, definitely they're now fast enough and small enough that they can be done. So some ZK snarks can be. ZK snarks is one of the variations of zero knowledge proofs, and they can be done on a mobile phone now.
Wow.
So and the proofs are constant size.
Yeah.
It doesn't depend on how much computation you do. You just have 288 bytes.
So one thing we didn't talk about zero knowledge proofs either yet is the scalability of them. So they're great for privacy, but they're also really great for scalability, because instead of storing the entire blockchain transactional data anymore, you can make a proof of it, and then you can make a proof of this and a proof of this, and then you can store proofs of proofs, and so then you have absolute scalability. And Starkware and Coda are two projects that are using zero knowledge proofs for scalability. So, also cool. And again, I think that that's something that then feeds back into security, because if you are doing things more efficiently and removing these places for attacks, you're increasing the security of stuff. So, yeah, I like to believe that we're going to change the world. So, yeah, it's a long quote, but I'll read it to you. Open platforms and experimental amateurs eventually beat out the spendy slick pros. Relying on incumbents to produce your revolutions is not a good strategy. They're apt to take all the stuff that makes their products great and try to use the technology to charge you extra for it or prohibit it altogether. Yeah.
Okay, so you say you'd like to change the world.
Oh gosh. Are you going to make me regret saying that?
I was just curious. Okay, no, you're there. Never mind.
I'm there?
Go, yeah.
How?
You were about to just go there. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, this is just about like thinking about. We'll switch to like a little bit more thinking back to security, but another aspect that is both on the like more moral level, but also on the security level is questioning, as you're working with different software, how can they be misused? How can the incentives be abused? And how will power be re-centralized? I mean, that's particularly if you care about P2P and decentralization, then yeah, asking how it'll be re-centralized, because people collect. And they will find a way to do these three things with your systems.
Okay, so then I have my question.
Yeah.
Because it didn't necessarily go where I thought it was going. Which is, so when we are designing the kind of world that is private and secure and has ZK snarks and is, or whatever, zero knowledge proofs, or ways in which we can protect our privacy and maintain a certain degree of transparency. I mean, I guess that's the idea. Then, are there not other security risks once we've accomplished that? Like, what are those security risks? And you don't have to answer that now. Maybe it's something to answer at the end. But I'm just like, because obviously there are other security risks. Like once we've accomplished that and create a world that has like an internet that can't be re-centralized or
then other attacks will come about. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm just curious about the like ethical questions there, and
Well, that's
thoughts.
I mean, that's why I think these difficult. But like, we can't predict the future completely, but we can know that like even if we build our technology to correct certain things and to achieve certain goals right now, that once they're out in the wild. I mean, and this comes like from the idea of like the security and adversary and stuff, that like people will try to figure out how to game it, no matter how much you've thought about gaming. People will try to misuse and abuse and re-centralize stuff, and so yeah, you have to think about how could that possibly happen with your system, and there is a way to do it, and it's just a matter of time before somebody figures it out. That's what like security is, like risk management. It's not any kind of guarantee, so you can't guarantee that you can build a new system that's going to solve all the world's problems. They might solve it temporarily.
Damn.
Damn?
But no, you can't solve all the world's problems with a system anyway.
someone disagrees, like in the idea of it, that's cool. But
I was being cheeky.
Yeah. Anyway, this is just some things, but we could go into like these are just a list of like recommendations for people to do stuff. But I don't know. We can go back to it. Threat modeling. We could do an exercise about threat modeling. And before we do that, we could also, I'll just quickly say that there's this idea of adversarial thinking too, that like you can kind of think of this as both sides, like to figure out what your threat model is to also, it's also useful to think about what your adversary would possibly do, and the adversary is like whoever you're trying to protect against. There is a term called red teaming. I don't know if anyone's heard of red teaming, but basically thinking like an adversary, having an independent organization think as an adversary against your system. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, I mean, we could talk through a system both on the threat model side of stuff and then also thinking from the adversarial perspective of how would I game and attack the system if I wanted to. And that's the kind of two sides that are really helpful to think about when you're working on security stuff.
Let's do it.
Yes, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was thinking, so like all this approach, it's grounded on like a framing of the world, which is, you know, you might have attacks and because we're living in this world. But like, if we were living like in a different like world system, there would be not easily have like accumulation and like attacking and all that. Like all this work would be meaningless. If we like different. As a framework, you know, to like to approach these problems, because maybe there wouldn't be problems. Maybe that's like a very long, like a very far away question, but I was just thinking it makes sense because we live like in this system which, you know, is very violent. It's always about like individualizing people and blah, 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 you know, and so you have to like to figure out how you to stay safe and how you want to work like use a system and so on. But if you imagine like a very different world, you know, very different like ideas how to stay together, and for example, not having this idea that like the data that they collect from Facebook from you, like it's not your data, but it's like data that you produce with this software, and then you can use it like for data banks and you can share it.
So thinking about changing how.
Yeah, like also how you frame, you know, how you see it, this whole thing.
Yeah.
So that would be also interesting, like as a red team exercise, where you like flip completely, you know, the game, you know, or like the actual the rules and what you care about.
Yeah, I mean that kind of concept is one of the like. Depends on your personality and your interests, but some people find that really fun about the side, like about security, which is to think about like, how would I break things if I was going to break things? That's what's fun for some of our team members who do security audits. Is like they get to think about how would I break it, how would I game it, how would I mess with it, how would I be that adversary if I was going to be that adversary without being the adversary actually. If that's what you mean. Yeah, thinking from the other side. Right. And that's really important when you're coming to security because because you have to design your system with more than just your worldview in mind. Yeah.
Could you show the slide before this one?
Yeah, that one?
Yes. And then the one before this one?
That one?
Yes, which you said you go back to. That's fine. I mean, if we wanted to,
we can talk through this if you want.
Oh, I was I hadn't read it, but I was curious too.
Yeah. So this is just like things that I recommend that we do to make Web3 decentralized P2P networks better. Publish security audit reports. So if you do independent audits, or even if you do audits yourself in-house on your systems, publish them. Talk about it openly. Security testing results, and we discuss lessons learned. So basically just share, because we're like coming back to, especially in the gaming front that we were talking about earlier, that a lot of it's experimental, that we think that we figured out how to make the rules of the game correct, but as we know with like DAO hack and stuff, that like we're not always right on that. And so it's good to talk about it. Talk about why privacy matters in general. So yeah, why does the personal data matter to you? What value does it hold? Is it such a big deal that people have it? I mean, I think it depends a lot on the circumstances and the piece of data and stuff, but it's important to just talk about why that matters to us as individuals, as a society, like as collections of people, and how that paradigm shift with like new technologies and different implementations of technologies can change things for us. Fund new security research in general and experiments, including with a UI UX focus. This is something interesting. I didn't put any slides in here about UI UX and its impact on security, but this is also another really important aspect. There was this really interesting research project that people did. It had to do with Android mobile apps, so not in this space, but they were looking at Android mobile apps within the Google Play Store and finding like the appearances of common security mistakes in the code. And they found that, like, you know, they were seeing like, okay, there's a bunch of the same mistakes being made across the board in these Google Play Store apps. And so they said, okay, let's go a little further. Like, why are these happening? Why is there this, like, we know better, so why is this mistake being made so much? And they went back and they looked at the Android developer documentation, where the developer documentation says don't do this, and yet people were doing it. And so then they went and looked at Stack Overflow, and they saw in Stack Overflow that there was code snippets that matched the code that was the problematic code in the apps. And these code snippets on Stack Overflow were like, but they were code snippets that are easy to copy and paste. I mean, you guys do development, you know, you copy and paste, right? You Google, you copy and paste. We all know the dirty secret. And so on Stack Overflow, there were these code snippets that were insecure, basically, and they were being used. And if you looked at Stack Overflow, if you scrolled down, you would see down at the bottom, like, somebody posted a comment that said, don't use this code snippet, it's insecure. But you'd have to, but so, and then the tie to usability here is that it's about, like, even developers are users too. That the reason that these incorrect code snippets appeared so often is because the code was easy to find, they Googled it, they copied and pasted it, and the warnings were too low and not visually significant for the developers to notice to not copy and paste that code. And so something as simple as changing the UI of your developer materials can actually lead to better secure, like more secure apps across the board. And so this idea of UI UX has always been focused on the end user, and that their point was that developers are users too, that there's people throughout the security, throughout the systems chain that are users also, and that their user experience and user interfaces matter just as much to that. So it's not just the end user who's making who's clicking the wrong button or making the wrong security decision, it's also people further up the chain.
I disagree.
What?
I mean, this is not due to UI UX, but because they were lazy, these developers.
Well, I mean, you could look at it that way, but I think that, like, but if you think of it in the sense that, like, everybody is trying to do their jobs in the best way that they can do, right. To say that it's lazy that they copied and pasted from Stack Overflow, I think also, but most people do.
Are you saying that it was the problem of Stack Overflow design? Because that's just how it works as a forum, so people download a comment, and that's not the problem of Stack Overflow.
Right, so Stack Overflow is lazy.
But why?
Because
they didn't have
But it's not about them. If you download like a comment, like they cannot decide that it should go up.
But see, here's the thing is that it's everybody.
Exactly.
So it's everybody along the way. But something as simple as Stack Overflow, allowing people to maybe when they commented about a security risk or a security problem, allowing those people to comment with a big red exclamation point next to it that says security warning. If they did that, then perhaps people wouldn't have copied and pasted that code if they had put that feature in there. If they allow, like, those kinds of warnings to float up to have a priority, it just shows that, like, the entire process of software development, security needs to be consideration on different levels, not just to say developers think about security, but to also remember that they're users in their own right, and the systems and tools that they use need to also make it easier for them to be more secure. Because, yeah, you can say you're lazy, but at the end of the day, like, there's always going to be this pool for everyone in every job to do it as quickly as possible, right? I mean, like, we try to get our job done so that we can go home for the weekend. We try to, and so, like, that they're going to Google, they're going to find the code, they're going to copy and paste. And so I mean, I would also argue that you could maybe learn from it too, that Stack Overflow was lazy by not listening to their users and making the warnings more prominent or something. So, I mean, it's good research to show that the discussion about like how we can improve security of our systems isn't as simple as just saying everybody think about security. It's more complicated, that we have to see that that there's different kinds of things that occur during the workflow, and that everybody's a user, and the user experience needs to be good for everyone along the way, because that'll make our systems more secure. It's really good research. We can also post the link to this. Another team wrote the paper on this, and it was really cool. Yeah. Oh, so bridge learning from research to implementation teams. So also, like, yeah, we know that zero knowledge proofs are reaching some really cool advances in the research space right now. How do we make sure that people implementing systems know about those things? That's something we need to work on, is bringing the people together. Yeah, make more developer resources that support security by design. So how do you help people learn to be security minded from the start? Engage in policy and governance discussions to ensure security is a priority. So just in general, how do we make sure that people are incentivized to think about security at different points in the production of our software and systems? So yeah, if you're part of a community, how can the community governance further support security and stuff? How can policy decisions by communities be made to support security? Yeah, try new approaches to bug bounty programs and ways to incentivize ethical disclosure. So again, we can't think about every single possible security vulnerability in our systems. So how can we incentivize other people to report those in an ethical way to us? To not hack us, but to report those to us. So white hat hacker programs, bug bounties, how can we just make those better? Or how can we drive those people to go, find other ways to tell us about it? If you find a 0-day, can you report it in a better way? Build partnerships and coalitions of security professionals. So yeah, get everybody together and get them talking. And set up training programs to help others be more security minded too. That's that slide. Yeah.
Will we be able to send the slides to people? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of a high level question.
Yeah.
But in sort of peer-to-peer space, the growing peer-to-peer space, blockchain specifically, there have clearly over the past couple of years been huge, as you've mentioned, huge security issues.
Yeah.
How do you see this and maybe people still acknowledge this space as, oh, it's experimental, it's bound to happen in certain ways?
Yeah.
So there is an acceptance of it, but where do you see that culturally changing? Do you see projects becoming more secure, and where do you see that security mindedness? Is it truly like built to be secure, or do you see it kind of being still very reactionary?
It's a really interesting question, and this is difficult because I feel like I'm really biased, and I feel like I'm privileged to be in a bit of a bubble, in the sense that like we make it known that we deal with security and privacy. So people come to us who care about security and privacy. They connect with us for that reason, right? So I mean, like sometimes we get this when people talk about our security auditing clients. Like somebody who they're like, do you ever get clients who like really don't care about security and don't want to spend the money on a security audit? It's like, well, no, kind of not. I mean, like we might get a flavor of that, but they don't come to us. Like you're not going to go to a security auditor if you don't think security is important. So I often wonder. Maybe I shouldn't say I wonder. I'm very clearly getting different people coming to me and talking about these things. But that said, I do try to like wander outside my bubble and observe the rest of the world and see. It does feel like people care more about security and privacy than they used to. Objectively speaking, the fact that like GDPR came into effect, like there's like even signaling from governments that are saying that this is important. We hear about other people around the world thinking about passing similar regulations and stuff like that. So the governments are noticing. The newspapers seem to report more about hacks and security stuff in the last few years than they used to. Even we can talk about like Snowden and stuff like that and surveillance. Like back in 2013, before that, like people like, we knew that stuff was happening, and people talked about it, but most people thought that the people talking about it were crazies and paranoid. I mean, that was often the reaction that people got when they spoke about those things. And then, like, with Snowden talking about that stuff publicly, then people were like, oh, maybe you weren't so paranoid. Maybe that's it. But even people didn't necessarily change change their actions since then, and it seems to people care more. I mean, people thought that Bitcoin was anonymous when it first came out. People know better now. Mostly.
We hope.
Mostly. I still hear people saying that it's pseudo-anonymous, but kind of is. Kind of.
Is Monero anonymous?
What?
Monero anonymous?
It's a big step forward.
It's what?
It's a big step forward.
Yeah.
What's a big step forward?
Monero.
Monero.
Oh, Monero is anonymous.
No, I mean, this is what Liz said. You can never be 100% sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Recently, there was this paper about timing attacks and side channel attacks on Monero and Zcash both. They were easily avoidable, but they happened. So you can never really 100% be sure.
Does anonymity and traceability, like, are those synonymous? Like, so anonymity means I can't.
Identity.
Okay, it means like this is clearly your identity is tied to this expenditure, right? So there's a transaction and I can see your identity.
That's not so simple, but somehow you must get the Moneros, so somehow there must be an interconnection to real money, through Bitcoin or whatever. So there are, and then you if you don't use Tor properly, then maybe they can chase your
So that's traceability, right? I mean, that's essentially like a little bit of data forensics that has to happen in order for you to discover who. It's not like in Monero itself. Your identity is not in Monero itself.
Well, I think this is true of all systems that are trying to give you anonymity. Like, the idea of true anonymity is like saying that something's truly secure. It's basically impossible. It's just about how much work it takes for them to de-anonymize you, basically, and how easily available that is, and how realistic it is to occur right now. So there also might be the occurrence that, like, right now they can't like link pieces of data together to figure out who you are, but is it likely in the foreseeable future? Like, could there be other data points that come about later? And I think and that's why, like, you get things like people thinking that Bitcoin was anonymous, because it made sense, like, hey, my identity's not attached to this address, so I'm anonymous, right? And then people figured out the transaction graph and, like, made other connections with other data points, and, like, this kind of traceability thing that you were saying, that then you can cross it with other data points and start to de-anonymize people. And so, yeah, I don't know, it's like it's one of those tough subjects that it's something that you work towards, but realize that there's always a risk there. It's just also it's a bit of that, like, kind of cat and mouse game too, of, like, how difficult is it? Just like security, like, you make it so difficult enough that it's very unlikely.
So people call it then reasonably
secure. Yeah. Reasonably enough.
Like the Cubes OS, it's their logo. I think reasonably secure operating system or something.
I didn't know that. That's good.
Which OS?
Cubes OS, which is very recommended if you're privacy concerned. I would recommend Cubes OS.
So reasonably secure is like a pretty high recommendation.
I mean, it's crazily secure from my point of view, but calling it reasonably secure is even cooler than
right.
But I mean, this is also like that sign of like security professionals and stuff. Like, so it's like if you're really in, like, you know. And so you're going to be like, it's reasonable.
Right.
If you're coming from the outside and you're like, we're secure, 100% secure.
Exactly.
It's like, you haven't spent enough time thinking about this, have you?
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, I think within the blockchain space and P2P systems and blockchain, to come back to your question, I do think people are more privacy and security aware than they used to be. Yeah.
Also, there's this huge amount of money be pumped in this space, right, in 2016-17, and so you have also a lot of trash coming up. I'm doing blockchain now, like.
Yeah, I mean, it came with good and bad, right? I mean, like, because I mentioned earlier that I came from, like, the internet freedom type space where there's not a lot of money in digital human rights and stuff like that. Not a lot of money there. But a lot of the systems that were like, but there's a lot of privacy enhancing technology that's cool that's happening. There are a lot of P2P systems and stuff like that. And There was, but then, I mean, I thought even with all of the marketing hype around blockchain and the buzzword stuff and whatever, like the fact that there was just now money going into decentralized systems and people even considering stuff that was different than just like your centralized account-based systems was like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. And now it does seem like even you all doing this whole program right now, like this, I wouldn't have imagined like people would do it like 5 years ago. So it's cool.
This is what she does at work too. She just comes to my desk and says,
"Do wait for ideas to emerge."
Do I really? No. Okay. That would be kind of funny.
That would be funny.
Maybe I'll do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
If we want to play the red team game with the app I just released, I mean not me, but the team, then we could.
Yeah, I mean we could do some like
or something.
I don't know how we are on time either.
Maybe
It's
about half an hour.
90 minutes approximately.
We could also we could pick a system and we could start talking about how we would attack it, how we would secure it. We could so there's everything from like threat modeling to like down into the actual attacks. I mean, I don't know. Do you all feel like threat modeling is something that like you kind of get?
No,
never done it.
I think it's pretty interesting.
Oh, cool.
Like I had a question, like, or was wondering how would a security audit happen, or like who would be the people, how many people, or what is their their tech knowledge, or
yeah, the skill sets. Yeah.
Or how do they, or like how would the team look like, right? Is it a team that do the security?
Always a team. Yeah. I mean that's one thing that I think that audits. Yeah. So here I had a slide about the process, but yeah, so for us and most people do teams when they do security audits. There are some people who do single stuff, but this is where I think that security audits are also kind of better than bug bounty programs, because bug bounties, just in the nature of how they function, incentivize individuals working alone. Most bug bounty programs don't have a good way to divide the bounty across a team. So it doesn't really influence collaboration, but the auditing process does help with like most auditors that I know, they always work in teams on projects. We definitely always do teams because there is something that happens. It's really nice when you get to talk things through with someone else because like there's like this kind of thinking like about how would I attack it? Like where could I like game this? And some of those ideas, the best ways to do that come from talking to each other, where someone's like, what if I did something like with this line of code here? I feel like I could maybe get a weakness that like, there's something there, and then someone else goes, yeah, you could do this, that kind of collaboration stuff that happens. But so for us, like we look at a project. Okay, so I can even go through like the business process a little bit too, that people come to us and say, okay, we have our system, we want, or our software, we want an audit.
I think our company also did like a security audit. I don't know who they asked. But
yeah, most auditing firms will follow the same process too. There's some like slight variations too, but it's pretty standard. And so the comments say, okay, we want to get an audit done. We say, great, let us know a little bit about your code, like what's it written in, how many lines of code, can we look at it? Usually this is easier to assess when it's open source because it's just there, we can go look at it. We look at documentation, and we just look at the general complexity of the project. Everything from like the languages used to what is the system trying to do, and like what is the goal of the system, how is it kind of, and how it's implemented. And then we talk to our team and figure out like what skill sets are needed. So there's different skill sets. So like if you have someone who is doing smart contract, like if there's a smart contract review, then of course you need somebody like if it's Solidity or whatever language that smart contract is in, then you need somebody who understands that language, but you also usually need somebody who has a skill set around like incentive design and like incentive mechanisms, and trying to understand like how they would game it, because smart contracts are usually trying to do something with money, right? And so you kind of have to understand like what are they trying to do and stuff. So that's usually a skill set, but it depends. like protocols, it depends on what the protocol is trying to do. So, or if we're looking at a whole blockchain, new blockchain implementation versus a smart contract, you're going to get like a different language for what the blockchain is written in. But you also, again, what's the purpose of the blockchain? So, is it just a cryptocurrency, or are they, you know, tracking diamonds? That was a fun one. Are they tracking diamonds on the blockchain? No, we didn't actually audit that. But yeah, like, so like, are they putting an asset on the blockchain, and how are they doing it? And so then, you know, you probably have some, like, maybe some economics there, maybe not, it depends. Or is there a thing to use zero knowledge proofs? So then you need on the team. Or, you know, so basically it just depends on what the project is. And so we assess, like, what skill sets are necessary to look at it, and then make sure that they're complementary with each other. Then we'll give like a proposal, and if it's accepted, then we kick off the project, and that's when we'll do our we'll do a little bit more depth of discovery and planning. We also talk about areas of concern with people, the project team, because oftentimes that we'll develop our own areas of concern to look for, but we also like to ask the project, because it also depends on their goals for the audit too. Are they trying to show the public before their mainnet launch that they're like doing their due diligence, or are they trying to reassure their investors before they do token distribution that you know, people are going to actually get their tokens, things like that. So, you know, that will also help us like kind of figure out what to look at too, and how to meet their needs.
And in B2B projects, or like in the blockchain, like what kind of stuff were found, like or like a pattern, or like people normally forget about, or there's no such thing?
Yeah, you know, interesting. We're doing an analysis on that right now. We're looking back through all of our publicly released reports, plus all some other auditing firms' publicly released reports, to look for patterns. Because, you know, if you asked that question 2 years ago, there wasn't enough out there to find patterns yet. But now there's been enough audits done that we could hopefully find some patterns and mistakes. We have some like gut feelings about that stuff, but we wanted to actually get some data. So we're doing a research project right now, and we'll probably blog about it in a couple months when it's done, to try to figure out what those patterns are and work on that. And then, yeah, so then we start we'll do the audit, and that usually is just like, it depends on anything from a few days to maybe even a couple months. Getting longer than that starts to become unrealistic for project management purposes, and just asking a project to pause major development for more than a couple months is kind of crazy. Yeah, so then after the investigation, then we'll produce an initial audit report. You can see examples of those on our website, and there's plenty of other ones published out there by other firms too, and they usually contain some bit about methodology, a high level summary, general comments, overall comments on the project, on their findings, and then also specific issues and specific suggestions. So issues are usually like very specific vulnerabilities that need to be addressed, and suggestions are kind of like, we didn't find a specific attack with this, but there could be one here, so we suggest you improve it, kind of thing. We suggest you do this thing just in case. And sometimes even those suggestions go to even like document this piece of your software better. Otherwise, you know, your developers who are coming and building on top of it are going to make mistakes, you know, and then you're going to have vulnerabilities there. So even quality of software and documentation matters. Yeah, and then that initial audit report, those issues, the suggestions always include like an idea of how to fix it. So how to mitigate it or remediate it. So it's like, how do you lower the risk, or how do you remove the risk altogether? So can you fix it completely, or can you at least lower it? And so that includes those. And so then that step 4 is where then after we deliver the report, then the other team, the project team, will just decide what to follow from the report, and they'll make the changes to their software. And then we come back and we verify that that those changes were sufficient based on what we could see. But sometimes that verification, and then we update the report to be the final audit report, and sometimes it is the case that what we found was like design flaw, like, and that, you know, okay, totally redo this part of your system because it doesn't work, or because it might be insecure. And so on those kinds of things, they might not be able to do it. And so then they'll just choose to figure out how to mitigate it, and that final report will just say like, hey, they did the best they could to mitigate this, and that's cool for now. But there's lots of detail, and I talked fast through that, so hopefully that was okay. Other questions? You guys want to talk about a P2P system? All right. Anyone in particular? Or we can go back to like, we can do threat modeling, or we can do that, what was that P2P slide?
Maybe, like talk how to attack a P2P system?
Yeah.
Maybe Monero?
I'm not looking at you, because you know Monero a lot of I don't know Monero at all. I've not looked at Monero, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how to attack Monero too. If I knew, I would.
But somebody figured it out, there is a paper.
I have no idea how to attack Monero currently. I don't think that there's a current actual threat out there.
What are some of the P2P systems that you guys have talked about so far?
Ethereum?
Okay.
Scuttlebutt.
Yeah, you talked about Scuttlebutt. Who talked about it?
Did you talk about 12?
Sarah Friend.
She did. Awesome.
Sarah Friend is great with security. We love Sarah Friend. We work together.
Nice. I don't know Secure Scuttlebutt as well, but I'm familiar with the project. I don't know about the attacks on it. But have you ever thought about it? You talked to
No.
Dominic on our team works on it, so he would be good for that one.
Dominic is in your team?
This
I mean, he's the guy, right?
He's the guy, yeah.
The founder.
I mean, if he wrote the code, I mean, he was the guy. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Maybe torrent clients? Torrent networks?
Torrent, like BitTorrent?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so what's the threat model for BitTorrent? What are you using BitTorrent for?
Just to download Linux.
File sharing, right? File sharing, okay. Of course. So, yeah, so file sharing on BitTorrent. Yeah, BitTorrent maybe that could be. I'm not super familiar with it, but you all are.
What does it even mean to attack this, right? What's an attack against BitTorrent? What's your goal? What do you want to achieve? To take it down, make it unusable, or what's the point? To
slow down the network as much as possible, so that slow down the network, or maybe have some fake leechers, a lot of fake leechers. So that
you're the RIAA. I think that's what they're called, the record executives, and you're mad about the file sharing of music. So you want to slow down the network. Yeah. So I mean that's also like where the threat modeling is who is this adversary? What do they want? Like.
And that's where bots can be used.
Yes.
Right? Bot attacks stuff. We talked about bots before.
I mean, one of the biggest problems with the file sharing thing is that the incentives are not proper, right? You said it yourself, you just download stuff. It's a free riding problem. I think this is one of the biggest threats for BitTorrent, because people just use it to get, not to spend, because you don't get paid for this. And there are newer approaches like Filecoin, where they combine these kind of things with cryptocurrencies, so that you get actually paid if you upload stuff or if you host stuff for other stuff.
But then that opens up a whole new threat model, right? Because now you have money.
Yeah.
Because your question is right. It's like, why would you want to attack BitTorrent, right? Like, what's there to do? Like, maybe you're the record executives and you're pissed off about music sharing, but beyond that, like, why are you attacking it? But if there's money involved, all of a sudden, if there's financial incentive, then there's financial incentive to attack.
But if there's
then you can game it.
But in general, the point of P2P network is, of course, that they are harder to attack, right? Because they have this redundancy in the distributed parts. If you have a single server, then of course attacking is pretty easy. Just DDoS it all the time. If you have the abilities, write a botnet or something to attack this special server. But if you have a decentralized system, that's one of the major ideas of the P2P system, that it's not so easy to attack. It's like a swarm, right? You can just attack parts of it, not the system as such, so to speak.
Yeah, it changes the ways that you attack it.
Yeah, it makes it harder. If the system is big enough.
I guess it makes it harder in some ways. It depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to bring down the whole network, I would agree it makes it harder. But if you're trying to, I don't know, other attacks might be easier. It just depends. Yeah.
So which system do we want to choose to do threat modeling exercise on? Actually, if you want to do it, anyway.
Yeah, is there a good example that you could provide? That might be a good one.
I mean, you can do it with anything. I mean,
Bitcoin?
you do threat modeling when you walk down the street
Yeah,
at
but Bitcoin is the
night.
hardest, right?
Bitcoin?
Sarah Swathy, did you want to use your project?
I would be curious. I feel like it's a fairly basic premise.
Go for it. What's
So
your
that,
project?
so that it might be easy to.
So what's your project?
So I can't say that it's that easy. I literally work doing it. So maybe I'm wrong. But it's a basic income that's distributed to everyone who onboards to the application. And it's basically backed by trust in the sense that your ability to transact is based on your one-to-one and transitive relationships in the network. So that means that if I trust you, you and I can exchange the currency, my basic incomes, one-to-one. And if you trust Remy, then I can exchange with Remy without trusting him. So,
so you go through your peers,
right.
and it's based on reputation.
Exactly. And so that's the system. You're given a basic income, meaning you're given like a regular occurrence of tokens in your
for just
wallet.
being a member.
For just being a member.
Oh,
So,
okay, cool.
Though in order to receive it, you have to have a basic trust network. So you have to trust two people in the network already.
Okay.
It's like it's a two-way trust. Is it directional or?
There's unidirectional and mutual trust.
And what does trust mean? It just means that you're connected?
It just means that you've agreed to, really what trust means is that you've agreed to accept this, like to essentially exchange currency between each other as though it's your own. So like that means that like, so anytime you join the network, you're given a currency that's, for example, in my case, like Saraswati coin, Laura coin. And so, though like it's all called the same thing, which is circles.
Yeah.
But when we trust each other, like we can exchange that without any issue. If I don't trust Laura, then I will not be able to exchange with her. So
got it.
Unless I am transitively connected to her in the network.
Got it. So you have to like be connected to that node directly or indirectly connected to that node to be able to trade money back and forth.
Exactly.
And it's like complete. It's like just it's like a 1 or a 0 on the trust. There's no like 80% or.
There is unidirectional trust, so in that sense, it's not wholly binary. Like, there's that, I guess there's a third and fourth, which is if one person trusts you, and you don't trust them, or if you trust one person and they don't trust you. So that would be the in-between.
Yeah, so what can go wrong? So what do you all have that someone else might want? And money?
Right.
Yeah. Reputation too, right? So connections. The connections hold value too. Because you can't move money certain paths, right? If you don't have the connections are valuable too. I guess anybody else have ideas of what else is valuable within the system? There's no right or wrong.
Knowing who's connected to whom.
Yeah, knowing the connections.
Because like my immediate thought is the best way to do it is just to go outside of the tech and be like, hey, we're bros now. And then, you know, I mean, like, what would you do? Like,
so knowledge of the relationship graph.
Like doing Kevin Bacon.
You're just saying like, do you mean like find the strongest node? You're basically like
whoever. Like if I want to get, like if I want her money for some reason, but like there's no connections. If I know who she's connected to and like how many, you know, how can if I can forge that, or I could be like, oh, you, my friend, and then this other person.
You're like stalking people.
Or something, or be like, you two should go on a date together. You'd like,
right?
Yeah,
get it all. Really strong trust graph.
I bet you trust each other.
That's like so. The first thing is identifying like what information is of value, and then figuring out how you can take advantage of it, right?
Right.
And then how easy it is and stuff like that is then what you narrow down into. So
But even if you get that connection, then but you can just then accept the money, right, from other people. You still cannot steal it, or how would you steal it?
It's not that you can.
You don't steal. You just get this money, right? Because you're part of the network.
Yeah, it's not necessarily.
Once you're in,
okay, so So we know that, so we could say, like, and if we were doing this properly, we could take notes and stuff, but it's okay, we'll just wait. But so if you know that, you know, so we listed already 3 things, that like the money itself holds value, the connections themselves hold value, and then the graph of the relationships holds, that is also potentially a valuable information too. So then you can also think about like, okay, so then how could we use this? So like, if you know the one of the money, like, yeah, you could lie, but like, if you know the graph of how the relationships are working, then you might know how the data is moving through the graph, and the data in this case is money. And so you could, that's where like the man in the middle attack possibly, there might be some vectors, there might be some opportunity there, right? Depends on what you're using to like send the money between peers.
Can you say the man in the middle being, can you re-explain?
You intercept.
Okay.
Between 2. So if you know the graph of where the money would move, if you know how the money moves through the graph, so you know what the graph is of the nodes being
right, so
and then you know how it's calculated that it moves through. Then you could know, okay, I know the money's going to go from here to here to here, so I could jump in and intercept the money between these 2 nodes. Like, so there, you know, like if so that information is valuable. Possibly there's an attack there. It depends on like how things are, how the nodes are communicated and stuff like that. So you'd have to drill down deeper into that. But like that's like, you know, you can brainstorm these kinds of things. And if I knew this and I knew this, then I can do this. And then the question is how likely and how easy.
Is the graph not public?
Oh, are you asking me? The graph is at the moment not public. That being said, like. It's like an open source project, but also it's on the blockchain. It's using XDAI, and so hypothetically, like you'd be able to surface who's transacting with.
You can build one over time.
Like it's not
like
hard.
This is what happened with Bitcoin and the belief of anonymity, that you can start to build a transaction graph by watching data move.
Yeah,
so you could watch like who's getting money. You could see that if I could see her account and I could see your account. And I could see that at this point in time, money left your account, money appeared in your account. There's a transaction graph there. Like, so now I know you 2 are connected, right?
But it doesn't necessarily. I mean, you would have to do a little bit of forensics in the sense that you would be looking at a hash, and a hash isn't inherently tied to identity in the Circles network. So it's not like you'd be able to, like, if you were really connected, I wouldn't necessarily know that it was you, but I would see a highly connected node, and if I were able to triangulate any other data points. I might be able to surface who you are. And
you might be able to go check then Facebook and see who he's friends with, or LinkedIn. So I mean, that's the other thing too. Is like, like you could get data elsewhere too.
That being said, it doesn't necessarily like me connecting to you and being able to transitively transact with you doesn't necessarily present the malicious attack to the network, unless I don't necessarily know that would be malicious.
This might not actually be a reasonable attack vector. We're just like brainstorming.
Totally. Yeah. Exactly.
How is it governed, Sarah Spondia? Like, how is it decided how much per month you get in coins?
It's a long story, but I'll try to nutshell it, which is that Circles as a basic income, like our goal has been to be commons driven. So that meaning that it's like a communal currency wherein the community itself weighs in on how the inflation rate works, what the issuance rate is, and like, but like we've gone through a number of like organizational reformations and like had to like rescope a lot. At this point, like we're treating everything very tentatively, and so ultimately the goal is for it to be like a community-owned initiative. So and it you know it remains like open source and things like this, but basically how those things are determined. I mean, it's kind of, we're not there yet. Like right now, it's a small group of people who are designing the application, and ultimately the idea is that, okay, well, can this be a commons-led activity where people feel informed enough even to make decisions like that about how issuance would function or inflation could function? That would be my answer. So yeah, so that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, if we want to like assume for the sake of this exercise that it is commons driven and everyone has one vote, we can talk through some of these other interesting attacks as well.
Yeah, then there's definitely going to be some like voting and gaming opportunity there. Definitely. No matter how you guys have it functioning, that's where, yeah.
We've already experienced some voting and gaming.
Yep.
Actually.
And we talked about that earlier, that one in particular is like an area of experimentation.
Yeah.
But yeah, but whereas like things like where I mentioned like the man in the middle, your team might have already thought through that potential attack, and you might already have something happening. And so it's like, you know, we can't, it's not to figure it out totally right now because we don't have all the details and everything. It's just the exercise of like, how do you think through these things, and how do you encourage your teams to go through these exercises and have these kinds of debates and the creative like adversarial thinking and stuff like that.
What about multiple identities?
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
How do you
Well, so basically,
That's a good one.
that's where the trust network. So like the trust network, and I apologize because I'm certainly not trying to defend the system. I'm trying to just articulate how it functions in order to determine whether or not there truly is a vulnerability.
Yeah.
So with the trust network and the trust graph, and the idea that even to enter into the system, you need to have somewhat of a trust network, and then also in order to transact, you need to trust the individuals that you're transacting with. That's supposed to be the civil like mechanism, essentially, that prevents civil attacks. That's not to say it's foolproof, because you could create like an island of civils, right? Like you could essentially create multiple accounts, have them all connect to each other, and then once they connect to one trusted party who is non-civil, like it could hypothetically infect the network.
So this is where, you know, again, security is not 100%. It's about can you reduce the risk of that happening, right? So you make it so difficult that it's not worth it.
And once that happens, then
That would.
like what would you do if this happens? The state changes, and I don't know. It's just something like once. What if you trusted somebody? Then trust changes, right? Then
so you can revoke trust,
and then all the.
and then you will no longer be connected to their trust graph, basically. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So there's ways to like self-moderate or create reputation within the system. Beyond, like, you can also have people say, hey, I transacted with this person and everything went fine, or, you know, like, there are other reputation systems, but trust itself is, for the moment, the reputation system, and you can revoke it.
So if you had an enemy, for some reason, on the network, I don't know why they're your enemy. It doesn't have to deal, like, they've paid you back money or whatever. But why not? You have an enemy on the network. You could have the whole network gang up on this person and revoke trust from this person. And
right. And that would be maybe like a gaming attack, right?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You could have like all your friends go, you know what? This person just doesn't deserve money.
And I mean that's one where you're technically playing by the rules.
Yeah.
But you've figured out how to like manipulate the rules for a particular purpose. Yeah.
Which is kind of comparable to a voting block or something like that. You're basically like voting them off the system. Yeah.
You can kick people off too.
What's that?
You can kick them off?
Yeah. Well, you could revoke trust, which is not kicking anyone off. Like they would still even retain a basic income. It just wouldn't necessarily have liquidity.
Yeah.
So,
and therefore value.
Yeah.
Do the participants get rewarded for providing the liquidity for others? Like for being the pass-through?
Only in the sense that your own trust graph expands when you trust others in the network. So like, in that sense. Beyond that, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah. There's no other reward. No, it's not like incentivized. Trust is something that we're very cautious with, actually. Yeah.
Any other thoughts about value? We can go back to the threat model and too. What other information might be valuable in the system, or also you can think like the adversary of what could you gain?
And everyone's coin is worth the same amount? It's the Saraswati coin, but it's worth just as much as the Angie coin?
It is, though, like, one relevant point of valuation is traction, right? Like, if you can't spend it it doesn't really have a lot of value. So like you're receiving a basic income without a trust network, or without like, you know, and essentially the more robust your network is, and I mean healthily robust, like not full of, you know, not necessarily like, hey, trust anybody and everyone. It's like the more you have actually strong trust connections that you truly trust, the more traction your currency has. Like it means that you will have like a larger transitive trust network. So hypothetically, that's an indication of value.
Yeah.
Like it's really backed by trust in that sense. Like without a trust network, you're not gonna have a ton of liquidity. So
just to follow on that, so basically you can, if I understood correctly, you can like, you said that they're all XDAI, right? But they basically you can only circulate the coins that got, are they like attached to your identity also? Like
they're attached.
So when you pass them, like you pass, well, yeah, Salvador, they're traceable.
Yeah. So
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to the question. It's basically anytime you create a wallet, you create a hash, and that hash is your identity in the system. And anytime you transact within the system, it'll be tied to that hash. So it's a public key, essentially. And so that doesn't, and that public key is tied to a username, but that username is off-chain. So you don't have necessarily a way, like at least that's not like a breadcrumb to identity necessarily. This is a really fun game. So this is what you do here, huh?
I mean, I don't get to do the audits.
That's the same set.
This would be cool.
You too? And then from there it's like, then you two are like, because like you had to start with, you know what I mean? Because you're saying you have to trust 2 people in the network. Am I understanding it correctly?
Yeah, it's actually 3 people. I was trying to make it sound nicer. It's 3. And what is your question? What's the seed set?
Yeah, like who do you like, how does the network even start?
So basically it's a web app. It's a web app, it's a burner wallet right now, so it's like hugely insecure in a number of ways. It's MVP. But you would go to this web app and you would scan a QR code, and that is how you would, like, so of a person next to you, or like add them through their username or public hash. And then you would have a trusted person. Though in order to receive a basic income initially, you would need them to trust you back. So you would need 2 people, sorry, 3, to trust you.
So I could just pick like a random 3 people and then build that.
It can be random. It could be like, you literally could be on the train and be like, hey, like, stranger, you know?
I think about that when I think about like with the you know, sometimes like people ride with you on your ticket, you know. They'll be like, hey, you have a weekend ticket? And you're like, yeah, sure.
Sure.
I mean, maybe it's just me.
What if I
basic
published
income app.
that like on a website and was like, everybody be my friend, I'll trust you.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting. Okay.
With that, I will say it's just past 8:30, and so maybe some of you have a hard stop if you need to get somewhere else. But just, I think maybe Saraswati will stick around and answer questions about circles. But wanted to,
like a water break or something.
but yeah, people but I wanted to go ahead and thank you, Liz, of course, Mirko, Abby, Tanya, all of you all for hosting us and chiming in with all of your like different sort of expertise on this, because like while you see a couple of them here, they are largely distributed, so it's actually really nice to have you all in one spot, like 4 of you in one spot. But we actually saw Rami a couple weeks ago, Ram a couple weeks ago. Online, and that's been great. So Ram also works for Least Authority and does these security audits. So you can even ask more questions of Ram if you wanted. But thank you so much. This was great. And now you all know these folks, and Tanya's at least on Keybase, so you can follow up with her. But I also encourage you to chat with these folks as well. They all have very different domains, so it's nice to have you all here. Thank you.
Thanks for you for organizing all of this too.
A
And thanks
pleasure.
you all for
Happy
actually
to make it happen.
coming and doing this.
I was gonna ask